Hey, you, viewer, you've played Skyrim, right? Of course you have. Here's a question. What god or gods do the people of Skyrim, the Nords, worship? What's the divine presence at the center of their culture? I'm not asking rhetorically, honestly, go throw your answers in the comments. I promise you it's relevant. Alright, you about done down there? I'm gonna go out on a limb and predict some common answers. First, Talos.
I love, even as man, great Talos cherished us.
Thank you, Heimska. Yeah, Talos will be a common answer. A lot of you too will probably bring up the 9 or 8 divines, the pantheon of which Talos is sometimes a part, which include the gods worshipped in every conventional church throughout the game. Maybe there's even a couple of lorebeards watching. Maybe someone will have suggested the old Nordic pantheon, figures like Kain, Stun, or Jehunal, of whom we see but brief snippets throughout a playthrough. But which answer's right? Well, all of these, and none of them. In this video, I'll explain what I mean by that, as well as why that's so interesting, why, in my opinion, this little matter reveals Skyrim to possess a slightly more nuanced politics than it's given credit for. And yeah, in case you're confused, regular viewer, I do talk about games sometimes on this channel too, not just TV and movies. It's just been a little while since I've done so in a non-Patreon exclusive. So let's talk about Skyrim, culture, and imperialism. First, 2 brief history lessons on Skyrim's religious culture, one from an out-of-universe perspective and one in-universe. Because while it's true that if you load up Elder Scrolls V and go a-worshipping, you'll bump into shrines for Talos, Akatosh, and all the others, this wasn't always how things stood. Because the Elder Scrolls as a franchise is like 30 years old, and for most of this time, the fictional culture of Skyrim was supposed to be quite different to the version we ended up seeing in 2011. In textual sources, like the various pocket guides to the Empire, as well as in the Blood Moon DLC for Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, we saw glimpses of a pretty different Skyrim. Before Skyrim, the game, rolled out, all sources pointed to the Nords of the region worshipping a different pantheon of gods to the ones newer players might be more familiar with. And that's the old Nordic pantheon I mentioned briefly above, not Akatosh or Zenithar and all the rest, not Talos. That's right, the seeming hero god of Skyrim, the religious figure so central to this culture that the banning of his worship provokes a civil war. Canonically, he wasn't really a part of this culture until Skyrim itself came out. In the fan community, this is broadly seen as basically a retcon, a change to the setting Bethesda made in order to preserve a sense of cultural continuity from the previous 2 titles, both of which featured fairly prominently the same imperial pantheon we see worshipped throughout Skyrim. This plays into the popular narrative that Skyrim dumbed it down, oversimplified the series, sold out. And that's true to a point, but not entirely, because it isn't a straight retcon. There are explanations offered for the change in-game, and pieces of what we might call cultural detritus, little scraps left over from a different time, a different culture. First, there's the place names. Settlements like Kynesgrove or Shaw's Stone are named for gods no longer actively worshipped in the mainstream Nordic culture of 4E201. This detritus also exists in the language of Skyrim. But it's also visible every now and then in more obvious ways, like with Froki Whetted Blade. Froki's a hunter, living in a remote cabin in the Gerald Mountains south of the Rift. There's really no reason you'd ever find Froki's shack unless you're actively exploring for the sake of it, trying to learn more about this world, about the setting of Skyrim, and that's exactly what you get here, because Froki is one of the last followers of the old Nordic pantheon. He offers a fun little quest where you can undergo a ritual named Kain's Sacred Trials, and really engage with this nearly buried religion that Nordic culture hinted at in earlier games, but I'm less interested in the quest he offers than in the information he gives. This is what Froki has to say about the pantheon worshipped by the rest of his country.
They're stolen idols, imposter gods, sold by silver tongues. No thank you.
I don't think it's overselling it to say that this one NPC makes Skyrim a much deeper and more interesting game. With him in mind, and the rest of the clues hidden in the background, we can take a punt at establishing the in-universe history of Skyrim's religious shift. In between those previous games and now, in the 200 years between Oblivion and Skyrim, the northern province underwent a massive cultural shift. Perhaps their Cyrodiilic overlords saw an opportunity to build soft power in the wake of the Oblivion crisis, solved as it was by Martin Septim, a descendant of Talos, and the power of Akatosh. Perhaps it was in response to the gathering strength of the elvish Thalmor, the Empire wanting to use religion to galvanize Skyrim into a province of people who would more readily take up arms against these would-be attackers. Personally, my theory comes down to Talos, the deity who's become the heart of Skyrim's nationalist movement. You play Skyrim without reading a whole bunch of books, without snooping around for all the information you can, and the narrative you'll pick up is essentially that Talos was a Nord, possibly the last Nord from their ancestral homeland, who went on to found an empire in Cyrodiil and unite Tamriel. And while that's not completely wrong, it's very misleading. The real history of Talos, or Tiber Septim, is insanely complicated, both because of conflicting unreliable sources, and because there's a weird metaphysical level to it. He might not even have really been just one dude. But, to keep it simple, if Talos was ever just one mortal guy, he was probably a Breton, who fought against the Nords as much as he ever fought with them, before brutally subjugating the continent, which he would go on to rule, Skyrim included. In the general time frame we're looking at for the imperial conversion of Skyrim, this empire was weakening, beginning to crumble on multiple fronts, and against this backdrop, the idea to spread this imperial pantheon, and with it this myth of Talos, a figure who symbolically unites the nations of Skyrim and Cyrodiil, makes a lot of sense. In such an interpretation, the conversion of Skyrim to the religion we see in the 2011 game is imperial propaganda on a mass scale. Whatever the reason, it seems the Empire undertook a program of systematic syncretism in the north, over time convincing the Nords that their gods and the imperial pantheon were essentially the same, interchangeable. Froki's words give us a snapshot into one of the ways this might have happened: imperial priests showering the churches of Skyrim with money, so long as they started displaying imperial shrines and idols. Over the years, this leads to the cultural climate we see in Skyrim, where Nords are willing to slaughter their countrymen over the worship of a god who only really became a big deal to their culture a few generations ago. But nobody even realizes this, and I think this is fascinating. Even if on some level it is the result of Bethesda trying to simplify or homogenize this setting, because this is such a realistic conception of empire and culture for a video game to have. So many fantasy worlds come up with a culture or cultures for their settings, for lands controlled by this empire or that, without understanding this basic truth. Culture isn't static, and even when states exert this sort of cultural pressure, trying to reshape societies and lifeways to suit their own wants, it's never really that simple. Culture is palimpsestic, even when you try with all your might to wipe it out, to replace this or that, to astroturf, there's always going to be a residue, and almost no level of imperial control, of cultural whitewashing, of dominant, hegemonic pressure can truly erase it. There's always some level of cultural dissent, whether that's in the language of geography, within the culture's vocabulary, or within the memories of those few old men living just outside the reach of society. These few fractured signs of times past might never be able to overthrow the new, but maybe their existence alone is a form of rebellion. Skyrim appears to understand this, and as a result, Skyrim's engagement with ideas of imperialism, nationalism, culture, and cultural change isn't limited to a handful of clunky quests with middling writing. It's present throughout the world, in every shrine or blessed amulet you find, in every bandit whose dying curse invokes a dead god. So I'm not bothered that, at first glance, Skyrim seems to push these cultural markers of difference, these non-familiar parts of its world, to the very margins of the map, and into some barely perceptible background. Because if it didn't, the effect we've been talking about wouldn't exist. I think this change, from a Skyrim which still worships its traditional pantheon to one culturally colonized by Cyrodiil, is a great one, because of the way this game remembers to include these little details, the scars of this cultural colonialism. It's real, and it's potent. Is it a shame we don't get to see more of this religious and cultural turmoil as it happens, instead of after the fact? Well, maybe. We don't get to see this process in action, but we do get to see its after effects.
Put you down! Let's go! You've got! Come on!
There's some sense of poetic justice here then, because this invisible past of religious astroturfing has backfired spectacularly on the Empire. The imperial cult they thrust upon the people of Skyrim was dismantled in the peace treaty the Empire signed after the Great War, 30 years prior to the game's setting, and the resultant banning of Talos worship in Skyrim is the single greatest catalyst for the Stormcloak Rebellion, and the civil war tearing the country apart, the civil war which threatens to weaken the Empire even further. Again though, this sense of belated karma, this fuck around and find out, isn't really a point the game ever tries to make consciously, and I appreciate that. Bethesda's RPGs are a mixed bag, but I think they're at their best when they present to the player complex, layered situations and settings, and leave it to us to put the pieces together. That's what we see here. A world which understands the relationship between culture and imperialism in a really interesting, if barely visible, way. And sure, Skyrim is a AAA game. It's hardly some revolutionary text, but I think it's worth recognizing complexity and nuance when we see it, especially when the text would have been equally successful in a financial sense without bothering. So yeah, maybe bad thing, good. Thanks for watching this video, and do let me know if there's any other games you'd watch me ramble about, because the process of gathering clips for this was infinitely more fun than with my typical videos. Oh, and by the way, I recently set up a second channel, which currently has some other, more conventional gaming content on it, so hey, maybe give that a look. I've linked it below. Big thanks to all my patrons on screen now, especially Kevin Douglas.